Hello everybody and welcome to Organian's Puzzle Box. Now, if you're like me, you love highly detailed meshes from 3D scanning or sculpting. I actually went out a couple of weeks ago to do some 3D scanning as well. So these details models, they can be quite tricky to texture in case you want to, create textures for your sculpts or create textures for models that you scan instead of using the texture that you've scanned them with. And this requires UV unwrapping. Now, in my recent Unreal Engine project, the Astro Field Generator, I actually encountered this particular issue because I had a lot of complex geometry that needed unwrapping without reducing the detail. I wanted to contain the geometry because it works very well with nanite, and I really wanted the shadows and light to play with the geometry instead of a normal map or a height map. And today, I'm going to show you the workflow that I've used to be able to unwrap these with ZBrush. You will need ZBrush, a full ZBrush version, not the core version, so you need the one that has ZRemesher and has UV master in it. The steps are quite simple. We're going to go through them in detail. This video is a bit lengthy because I'm not really skipping any step, and you should be able to see the full workflow and be able to apply it to your own meshes. So yeah, let's take a look. So I wanted to very quickly show you how the these meshes that have been unwrapped with ZBrush, how they look in Unreal Engine. And what you'll notice here is that there's a lot of detail because I can actually repeat a lot of seamless textures on them, and because the seams are not very visible and very few, it actually holds up really well. So you can see just how grungy the textures are on this particular asset over here that we're looking at, and all the assets really in the scene are really nice and really believable as well. There's a lot of detail in the texture that I've managed to get over here. So, I'm just having a look over to see, you notice that there's a bit of stretching going on there on that one, but again, that's something that I could change in ZBrush if I wanted to. So there's loads of asteroids, different asteroids in this particular scene in here. So there's a lot to do. Once you have the workflow sorted out, you can just start bringing in a lot of meshes and just do them in the same sort of method. It is very fast, very snappy. It won't take you more than 5 minutes per mesh really to do this process. For our ZBrush workflow, we are going to have to import our mesh into ZBrush. So we're going to do this by actually just pressing the import button over here. Then I'm going to select the mesh that I'm going to work with, which is this one here. I'm going to double click that, and this will open a pop-up over here. As you can see, it's not quite centered, but anyway, just press OK, and this will import the mesh that you were looking for. And you can see the mesh over here. Now draw in to add in the mesh, and then make sure you press T on the keyboard or this edit button over here, so you're able to now play around with the mesh. Now, if we click on the display polyframe, or I think the shortcut is Shift F, you'll be able to see just how much geometry this particular mesh has. So there's a lot of geometry in there, and UV unwrapping this effectively would be very problematic. So we want to basically use automatic tools to be able to do this, and ZBrush comes prepared with this. Now we're going to need a few things that we will find up here into the Zplugin, so we can use them and quickly resolve our little problem. Now let's refine our interface a little bit. So we want to prepare the interface for the workflow. So what we're going to do is, by holding Shift, let's left click on the subtool, and then left click on the geometry while still holding Shift. This allows us to open multiple panels at the same time. And these are going to be the two ones that we're going to use, but then we also want to add another one, which is over here in the Zplugin. So if I go into Zplugin, I can then control left click and drag this wherever I want to drop it. So I'm going to put it over here, and you can see it's now opened it up in this panel. And then I can hold Shift again and click on the FBX export import. And then also we're going to do the same thing for UV master, like that. And this is going to prepare our, as I said to you, our interface to work with, because we're going to make things a lot easier. Now with our model into the scene, we can actually select it over here, and we can press this button here to duplicate it. So we've got two meshes at the same time. Now once we've got that, we can then scroll down over where we got ZRemesher. And over in here, we're going to remesh the duplicated version that we created. Now if you look up here, it's got currently 1.8 active, active points. So that's how many points that are on one of these meshes, and obviously there's 2 of them now, so that's why it's showing 3.7 million. Now, it's best to put this number where it says target poly count, to put it to, like, if it's 1.8 million, then you'd want to put this to something like 18, right? And then press ZRemesh. Now, you will see the bar up here filling up, and this is going to basically, show you how much the progress has been done onto the mesh. Once this finishes, you will be able to see the newly remeshed version. Right, now we've got that in there. We can then scroll up here and we can have a look at basically, hiding the high poly, which is the one at the top, right? And then this is the low poly that we've got now. And, if I'm bringing the high poly, you can see in there, right? This is basically how we can visualize these meshes. So high poly, low poly, right? Okay. Now, we want to then have a look at remeshing, unwrapping this particular low poly, but we've lost a lot of the geometry that we had. We've got the basic shape, but we've pretty much lost everything that made that particular asteroid to look quite nice. So we need to bring that detail back as well as unwrapping. A little bit of self-advertisement here, but if you guys are interested in purchasing projects for Unreal Engine, for Space, or for Blender, like Nebula generators or VDB clouds, then head on over to my Linktree page. With the description is in the link, sorry, is in the description below. But you can access my Patreon page that has all my projects, the Unreal Engine Marketplace, Blender Market, ArtStation, or Gumroad, where all of my projects are available. So yeah, take a look if you'd like to sample some of my projects. They're actually, I think, quite reasonably priced. Now, I want you to really understand the workflow of what we just did right here. We have now got a simplified mesh that's created from the high poly. So we've created a low poly version of that. And it's got 18,000 active points. Now, we're going to bring back the high poly as well. And we're going to select the low poly over here. Make sure they both got the eye onto them. If they don't, that's going to be a problem. So make sure you got the both on them. It's got the eye active. By the way, if you press this solo button, it will show you what mesh you've got active right now. So, for example, now I've got the high poly and now I've got the low poly. But let's just keep solo off for now. So we want our low poly to be unwrapped. And this is the point what you've got to really, really understand. Now, if you want an unwrap that's, quite in large chunks, so let's just put solo onto this. So if your unwrap is, I don't know, let's say you want this particular piece over here to be one face, right? So, one island or something like that, then you can start unwrapping now if everything is going to be in those higher chunks. But if you're actually looking, and I'm going to click on the high poly, if you're trying to unwrap something like that from there, or something like that, where it's a lot more precision is needed, then I wouldn't recommend you unwrapping at this stage the low poly, because you just don't have enough fidelity, enough geometric fidelity to get a proper unwrap of what you're trying to do. So for me, I'm trying to get quite a few UV islands in order to cover this mesh at high definition and so on. So I'm going to show you what I mean by this. I'm just going to click on the solo again, just to go back to where we were. I'm going to select the low poly again, and I'm going to go in solo mode so we can see it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to geometry, and I can press the divide button. And this is going to increase the number of polygons from 18,000, the active points from 18,000 to 72,000 active points. So with that done, we can have a look at doing an unwrap now if we want to. But before we do any unwrap, which by the way, I do recommend you doing the unwrap at this stage, or, you could press divide again and now you have even more geometry. It's 291,000 active points as opposed to the 1.8 million that we had. Okay, so I'm just going to undo and just keep it at 72,000 for now. And what I'm also going to do now is over into here. Sorry, where is that? I'm just trying to find the option. So we've got the unwrap over here, but we need to project. So we need to find the panel, which over here like that, as you can see, and you can click the project all. And now you can see that the geometry of the low poly has now moved and shifted in such a way that it's trying to copy the high poly mesh. Okay, so if we don't have enough geometry, then it won't look as good. So right now, it's pretty good. But if you want, you can press divide again, and then press the project all again. And now we have an even higher level of geometry that's coming even closer to what the original mesh was looking like. So actually, if I just disable solo and I show you just the high poly, so that's the high poly. I'm now going to hide it, and this is the low poly. There's almost no difference. Well, there is a difference, don't get me wrong, but you can see it over there as I'm switching between. There's a bit of high frequency detail on the high poly. So this is the low poly and this is the high poly. So if we really want to bring that extra detail, then we're just going to have to subdivide once more. But we're not going to need to do that as of yet, because right now we have enough geometry that we can do the unwrap, and then we can have a look at dividing again and projecting again. So I think you can kind of understand how this workflow functions. I'm just going to select the low poly again, and I'm going to go into solo mode just so I can see it. And then I'm going to go to UV master over here. And you can see we've got the unwrap option. Now I can press the unwrap option and see what that result is given. It might be a decent one. Or I can have a look at enable control painting, so then I can decide where the scenes are going to go. But we're just going to press unwrap just for the sake of it. Now you'll see in here, this function requires that you be at the lowest subdivision level. This is very important, because if you don't set the lowest, if you don't delete the previous subdivision levels of your simplified remeshed model, then you won't be able to use that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here where we can see the divide button over here, and then we've got in here where it says delete lower. So I'm going to press the delete lower, which means now I have only one subdivision level, which is this one. And by the way, this is a permanent move, so this now has 291,000 points. And now if I go up here and I press unwrap, you will notice that it will now start the process of unwrapping, and this will take a bit of time, so you're going to have to wait a little bit for it to do the work. As you can see right now, it's actually, the software is kind of froze, so depending on your hardware, you may want to not unwrap if you have too many points. So maybe at 291,000 might be too much for your hardware, so maybe you want to unwrap at, I don't know, let's say 71,000, like what we saw earlier, which was going to be faster. But let's just see what this unwrap does for us, and we'll see if we continue with this or if we revert and we actually use control painting instead. Okay, now we have our mesh unwrapped. Now let's have a look. So you'll notice that where we have the unwrap, we now have the option to flatten it. So if we press the flatten button, this will show us what that mesh looks like if we just check the UV. So as you can see, it's kind of merged everything together like that. It's not really great. So you can press unflatten in order to properly see it. So in theory, what you'd want to do now is really test the mesh. So you'd probably want to bring it into something like Blender or something to use a checker box in order to see it. And we're going to have a look at it very quickly just to see what the current result is versus what we can get out of it if we then use control painting. So I've just got my Blender open over here, and I need to export this particular mesh. So this one here, which is already selected. So we can actually press on the export button here, or we can go into, the FBX export and just press that. And now it will ask me, it will say what I want to do with it. So I'm just going to call it asteroid test 01. And that's going to be exported over there in that particular folder. Now what I'm going to do, I am going to go into my Blender, and I want to press File, Import FBX. And I do need to go into the folder where I have that particular mesh. So give me 1 second to quickly navigate to it. So this is my folder right here. So this is the mesh. I'm going to select it and just press import FBX. Now this is going to bring it over into Blender like that. And if I want to check very quickly, the UV checker, I can go over here and just go into shader, and with a mesh selected, I can create a, well, it's already got a material, as you can see. So we can just check for a checker texture like that, and you can see the color of the checker texture can be inputted into the base color in there. And we're going to switch over to a shaded view in order to see it. And this is what this is going to look like if you bring it into Blender right now. So it is unwrapped, right? Like we said, but as you can see, there's a lot of errors with it. So this is not exactly what we wanted in order to do that. Like we could get this done with Blender as well. Obviously not with a very high poly model, but you know. So if I switch over to the UV editor and I go into edit mode and select it, you can see it over here. There's a lot of stretching and there's just errors basically with it. This is not great. So I'm going to go back into ZBrush in here, and we're going to have a look at the control paint, and then we'll see some proper results. Okay, back in ZBrush, we're going to enable control painting. Now, there's 3 options in here. We're going to mainly use the protect or retract one. And what I would do, first of all, I would change this material to maybe like a chalk or something like that so we can see it better. You know, we can see what we're doing. Now, if you press the protect button, this will mean that this will be an area where seams will be discouraged. So basically, ZBrush will try not to add seams in that particular area. So let's say you don't want any seams here. So you can press the protect. Oh, it seems it's all automatically colors it when you do that. So let's say you press the protect and you want to add in here, maybe in here, you know, you don't want to have any seams there or anything like that, or like that. It really depends on how minute you want to go with it, but just bear in mind that ZBrush will not always listen to what you want to do or do what you want to do, so it's a bit of a hit and miss with it, to be honest. Now, one thing in here is that you can also press the attract button, which is the main one that you're going to use. So the attract means that you're going to tell it where to add the seams, where you're trying to add seams. Now, look at your shape and try and understand what type of shape is it, because if it's a spherical shape, then you want to, you know, imagine like a potato or something like that. You want to peel it in 3 ways. So if it was a spherical shape, you'd do something like, you know, I want one here, and then let me just move around. I then want one here, and then I could say, well, I want one here as well. So that could be something that you do for, well, you'd probably also go down like that or something, you know. This is just me giving you some very basic examples of how to open this up, you know, something like that. But this is not a spherical shape. This is more of a cubic shape. So I'm going to undo that. So instead, I'm actually going to do this particular bit that I did earlier, something like that. And then I'm also going to say, you know what, try and add some seams around here. It's going to be a lot easier if you have a pen and a tablet, to be honest. And then you could say, you know, maybe I want something like that to be cut open there, and maybe something like that. Now, the more seams you've got, the more work you're going to have to do in whatever texture software you've got. Maybe you've got seams to deal with and so on. So I've done it particularly this way, and we can now press the button over here. So, you know, we can, if you press the attract, this will keep up what you've done, and we can actually press the unwrap button, and this will start the unwrap process with the new painting that we've added. So let's just press the unwrap button and see what happens. Now, obviously, this was going to take some time, so I'll just resume once that's over. Okay, guys, the moment of truth now. I haven't actually tested it out to see myself, but let's just see what that unwrap did. I'm just gonna you know, click the flatten button, and this is the UV that we got. I mean, yeah, it's got some issues here and there. You can notice there's a bit of stretching going on here. There's some errors in certain points. Let's just have a look. Yeah, so there's clearly a little bit of errors, like over here. You can see where the geometry is a bit overlapping, so this might show up as a bit of an issue. We've got this particular bit right here. It's not too bad, but this definitely could be improved. So I'm gonna actually just see it how it looks like in Blender once I put a checker texture or a texture on it, because I think the checker texture is gonna be a bit misleading. Now, bear in mind, this is very important. Bear in mind that you know, if you don't unwrap, you're not able to see anything. You're not going to be able to use any textures on it. So now we've got it unwrapped. We've used procedural methods to do the unwrapping. This has taken a lot of tedious work out of our hands. Now you can refine this a lot more by doing protect and attract and making sure that you really color the entire mesh of how you want it to look. Do a lot of experiments until you get the right one. Every mesh is going to be unique in this particular thing, but I mean, it really took us less than 10 minutes to do this. So let's just go into Blender and see what that looks like. So I'm going to, I've got the mesh selected. I'm going to press the unflatten button. And by the way, I can leave it at 290,000 points, or I could divide it even more and then project again to get even more refined detail. But I'm just going to leave it for the, at that level for now, just so we can export it very quickly. So I'm going to press the export button over here that we've got in the FPS export import, so that we can, just immediately move it over into Blender. Okay, I am pressing the export button. And I'm going to name this 02, just so we have it for comparison's sake. And now it's writing the file and it's been exported. We're going to go into Blender over here. And now this is the one that we had previously. I'm just going to drag this over to the, I'm going to drag it just over here like that. And now I'm going to press File, Import, FBX and select the second one. And this will bring it over into the scene. And you can see that it's got its own material. I'm just going to drag it over like that over here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the material for this particular one. And I'm going to change it to the material of the first one, which is this one here. Okay, so now they both have the same material, which is not a problem. And you can see that they're very, very similar. Like if we actually put these, together, one next to the other, there's not that big of a big of a deal, a lot of detail, or sorry, a lot of changes within how they've been unwrapped. It's not, honestly, it's not that big of a difference, but they're definitely different. So what I mean by this, if I just drag this over here and I'll go into the UV editor. This is a texture that I'm going to use. I'm going to show you what that looks like in a bit. But in the UV editor, if I go into edit mode for this particular mesh, this is how the UV unwrap looks. Like there's a lot of space in here that we can still use. So that means that in ZBrush we could experiment further with seams in order to use this particular space even better. And if I go back and select this one over here and go into edit mode, you'll notice how this is like a lump over here, right? Now, in terms of actual real life use, real case use, this will have more issues when it comes to seams, visible seams and distortion of the texture than this one will. But neither of them are perfect right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the shader editor in here, and I'm going to Control T to add a mapping node to this checker texture, or you can just add these nodes manually. And now if I go onto the scale and I sort of like increase that, we'll be able to see how this sort of the checker texture is being affected. And this might give you the impression that this is how the seams are. Okay, now this is a bit misleading as well, and because if I add in a texture, so I've got a base color here of a seamless texture and a normal details of a seamless texture. And if I plug the normal of this into the color of the normal and then the base color over here, like that, make sure you're in shaded mode, you'll be able to see the texture on these meshes. Now it's a bit shiny, and that's because we need to make sure that this particular normal here is set from sRGB to a none color, and that will fix that issue. And now you'll see that they do look different. This one actually seems to be a bit higher detail because it's occupying a bit more of the island, while this one a bit lower maybe detail, but definitely not that many issues in terms of stretching and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect this mapping node to the vector of the normal and the base color. So now we can actually play around with the scale. So if I, play like that with a scale, which is, it's a bit weird because we're actually using the generated option. And this is what made this checker texture actually go crazy as well. So let me just show you what I mean by this. Let me just disconnect this again. Make sure that we're using the UV of the vector, not the generated texture coordinates. And now I'm going to put the checker texture in here like that. And now if I, play around with the scale, now we're probably able to see this. So this is what it looks like on this particular mesh. Let's just try and find the seam. This is the seam going all around. You can see it over here. This is where we're going to have issues with the mesh, depending on these particular seams. They're actually not that bad, to be honest. And then this is the other one. So this one, Sorry, I'm a bit clumsy with the navigation. This one doesn't have a lot of issues with the interconnection. So let me just walk around it. You can see it's not too bad, actually. I can't really see any particular issues with it. There's a seam over here, but it's quite clean. I mean, all the seams are quite clean. Again, both of these are suitable. It's just the one on the right, trust me, is going to be better than the one on the left. Right, now, we've got both of these textures. We're using the UV coordinate. I'm just going to plug in the color, and I'm going to plug in the normal. And this is what they look like. Now, you'll notice this one is going sort of that way, and this is going that way. There is a bit of slight distortion over here on this one, which might need to be fixed in ZBrush. Let me just play around with the scale. The scale is a bit too much, so let's just try something like that. Okay. Now I'm just going to show you guys something here very quickly. If I go in File and import FBX, the original mesh. Wanna bet what that's gonna show us when we try to add the material to it. So this is the original mesh right here, and I'm just going to select the same material, and yeah, that's what that looks like. There's nothing there because there's nothing mapped to it. And if I add the checker texture, for example, cut out the normal, and then go to generate it as a vector, you'll see that in this particular way, we're able to see that texture because with the generated texture coordinates of the mesh, that's gonna show us some, it's gonna take that seamless texture and try and, throw it around like that. And that's why it looks this bad, right? But once you switch over to UV, which is normal, the proper way of doing it, then it just looks very, very weird. We can also use object projection, something like that, if you'd like to. But again, this is going to have the same problem as the generated coordinates as opposed to the UV where we are in control. So I definitely would advise that we use the UV instead of using that. Now, you do have to have a look at these sort of areas where there's, as I said to you, where there's distortion, and these need to be fixed inside ZBrush where we have where we're adding the attract and protect. So you're gonna have to play around with this in order to stop getting those distortions. So this is really on a case-by-case sort of scenario. The asteroids that I've got in my a project have all been resolved with this, and it only took me about, I don't know, as I said to you, about 5 to 10 minutes per asteroid to do. But I hope you guys enjoyed that tutorial. I think it's going to prove quite useful to some of you. I think there's a lot of work to be done around unwrapping, and, doing manual unwraps is fine if you have the time and if you have the energy for it. But in some cases, when you're talking about meshes such as, I don't know, rocks or trees or things like that are, organic in shape generally, I would say that a very chaotic nature requires that we use tools that don't follow a straight line, so to speak. I think it's very difficult to do that. I think we've got to be realistic, and I think better tools will come along and that will improve this workflow. I think UV unwrapping is going to be a thing of the past in the coming years. But for now, this is a workflow that I've been taught, and I'm teaching it to you. So I hope you enjoyed. If you'd like to support the channel, have a look at my Patreon or my Linktree. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Keep creating.